Hi everyone. Today I'm here together with Bernado Kastrup, who is a philosopher. And during summer, I read his book, Why Materialism is Baloney. And that got me very interested in your perspectives and also reading a bit about your background. And you have a very impressive background. You hold a PhD in philosophy and a PhD in computer science, and you have started your own institute. So I just give the word to you, but I'll let you introduce yourself for a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Bernado Kastrup. I'm from the Netherlands, actually, despite the Dutch name. I was born in Brazil in a Danish-Portuguese family. I'm a philosopher and computer scientist, as you introduced me. I did start something once. I did start a company that was eventually sold to Intel, embedded processor technology. The foundation I'm heading now, I actually didn't found. It was founded by a very dear friend of mine, Fred Matzer, and I basically take care of it. I run the foundation, but I'm not the founder. And my life has unfolded through these two parallel lines, computer science and philosophy, thinking deeply about not only how computers work and how to make them more intelligent, but also the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness. And AI is the place where these two things converge. You know, we can surely build an intelligent computer, but can we create artificial consciousness? Even the question already raises other questions about our underlying assumptions about what is consciousness. Is it something that can at all be created, or is it already at the foundational level of reality? So I've written a number of books about philosophy, mostly 10 books now, I think.
Okay, thank you. And I've only read one of them, but I was very impressed, and I was also very intrigued by your perspectives there, and also perhaps the implications of those perspectives. So I know that many of our listeners would agree with me when I say that we are right now as a civilization at a very important point. We are at a crossroads. We are perhaps even at the bifurcation point where we could see either a collapse of civilization or a breakthrough to a new level of civilization. And that many of us are looking to try to understand what is going on, but also to try to see how we could possibly facilitate the transition into a better civilization, to have this bifurcation point develop into a breakthrough rather than into a breakdown. And I also think that many would agree with me that a very important aspect here is consciousness. It is consciousness in ourselves, but it's also consciousness in society, both in respect of our collective consciousness and what that could do, but also in the consciousness that is built into society, and according to your book, built into every aspect of reality, and perhaps even a fundamental aspect of reality. And that is, of course, no new idea. These ideas have been around in various forms for a long time, even from antiquity, I think we could say. But during the last couple of hundred years in the West, we have had a very materialistic, scientific, rationalistic worldview. And that worldview has helped us to achieve a lot of things. It has given us everything from so far from penicillin to human rights to democracy. But we can painfully enough feel, I think, that this way of looking at the world from mainly a materialistic perspective has really somehow reached a limit. And we need to both understand the world in new ways and find new ways of knowing. And that's how I was attracted to your thinking. So if you would, to our audience that are not at all mainly a philosophical audience. How would you describe your main arguments around the importance of consciousness and understanding consciousness today?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind, if we are talking about a change in society, a change in civilization, the first thing to remember is that the vast majority of people in the world are not thinking about these issues at all because they are too busy figuring out where their next meal is going to come from. They are too busy with sheer survival, finding a roof over their heads and and putting food on their table, to think about these deeper questions. So in a sense, this is a luxury of wealthy Western societies to think about it, but it is important nonetheless because it is the affluent Western societies that sort of set the rules of the game. And today, the rules of the game are entirely based on growth and competition. And no civilization is sustainable when it's based on eternal growth and forever competing. When it crosses the threshold of well-being, competition becomes a goal for itself. You compete because you need to compete. So where is that coming from? It seems to have the characteristics of an addiction. We feel that the only way to fulfill ourselves is to acquire more material goods or material related experiences that have nothing to do with introspection. They have to do with going out into the world and experiencing something out there. So where is that coming from? Why did we set the rules of the game around two unsustainable values, growth and competition, instead of well-being? And I think the reason is the narrative we tell ourselves about what the world is and about what consciousness is leads to the inevitable implication that we never find fulfillment. Because you see, under materialism, the world is made of, quote, matter, which is defined as something that is outside and independent of experience. It is defined in such a way that if you have a long enough list of numbers, then you will have said everything there is to be said about matter. Even if you don't bring any quality to it, any kind of, it doesn't have color, it doesn't have flavor, it's just spin, mass, charge, momentum, no, quantitative stuff, not qualitative stuff. So if you define matter that way and you say, all there is matter, mind itself, experience itself, consciousness is a sort of ephemeral side effect of certain configurations of matter, namely brains, that will eventually come to an end, and now experience will be lost. All of your memories, your insights, your learnings, the process of your maturation, all of that will be gone forever. If you have that narrative running inside your head, then the only possible goal in life is to accumulate material goods. There can be nothing else because there is nothing else. And of course, material goods give you a fix, like a shot of heroin, but they don't close the gaping hole in our chests, that hole, that lack of meaning in our chests, which affluent Western societies have experience with. Everybody else is dealing with survival, but we are dealing with the emptiness of our inner life, the lack of purpose, the lack of ultimate meaning, the lack of a relationship with something that is eternal and which we can relate with. Matter will never close that gap. But it's the only game we know how to play because of metaphysical materialism, because we believe sincerely in that absurd narrative. So we go after more matter, and therefore we set the rules of the game as forever growth and forever competing. It's like an addiction. You need your next fix of heroin, and it needs to be higher to get the same effect. And then the next one needs to be yet higher. And that's how we're going to destroy civilization.
But and I totally agree with you there. But even in a materialistic worldview, where consciousness is a side effect of material processes, you can still argue that there is such a thing as, for example, love, and there is such a thing as purpose. So why isn't that enough? Do we not take those things like love and purpose and commitment and faith? Do we not take it serious enough? Because we don't doubt that there is such a thing as love, do we, in a materialistic worldview?
A materialistic worldview would say that love is just certain chemicals flowing through your system.
Yeah, but it's still worth for me to strive for that, and it becomes important, and it can become very even painfully real, the love, especially if it's broken.
I don't think if you, in your heart of hearts, buy into the materialist story, I don't think that you can hold on to this notion that love has ultimate meaning, because materialism is very clear. It tells you that that's not the case. Damasio, one of the world's most famous neuroscientists, wrote a paper basically saying our emotions are just unwelcome side effects of behavior that is conducive to survival. Even our sense of empathy, when we see somebody else suffering and we feel the compulsion to intervene and help that person, Damasio argues that that's because doing that we increase our social cachet. If you help somebody else, then your group of people will say, oh, that member of our tribe is valuable. If I am in need, he will help me out. So your social cachet increases, and you stand a better chance to survive longer and have more children. So this is literally the materialist perspective. There is no such a thing as love as felt. It's an illusion. What's happening is just chemicals flowing through your system that will favor a survival oriented behavior. And a side effect of that is how you feel from within. There is no polemic in materialism about this. Now, most people would say, well, I do care about love, because when I am in love, it's important. When I love my children, it's important. In a sense, it's a kind of it's a cognitive dissonance that we learn how to live with until things get really serious. And when things get really serious, we sort of abandon that and we face the emptiness of the materialist perspective. So you may think that love and all this is very important until you get a terminal diagnosis. And then instead of staying centered, staying balanced, and realizing that, okay, love is a thing in itself. It's not going to disappear if I die, or I'm not going to cease to be invested in the future of my children if I die. You don't believe any of what I just said. And then you are suddenly naked and exposed to that enormous monster of the materialist way of relating to reality. You think everything, as far as you're concerned, is coming to an end. And it then doesn't matter whether it had meaning for you in the past. Ultimately, it has no meaning. When you die, it all goes with you into oblivion, into nothingness. And make no mistake, deep in their heart of hearts, people calibrate their behavior based on this conclusion.
Yeah, even if, as you said, many of us are not philosophers and go about our days thinking about these things, but we are still using the metaphors and the language and the thought models around this. So even if we are doing it unconsciously, it's still permeating our lives and our culture. I certainly agree with that.
To some extent, Thomas, because if we really didn't think that when we are dead, that our subjectivity is vanishing forever, if we really didn't think that that's going to happen, we would feel a lot more invested in what planet Earth will look like in 2100.
Yes.
We care about not wrecking the planet, because even though we are dead, in a sense, we are not, because our subjectivity and our love and our insights that survives in some form is still around here. We wouldn't wreck the planet, but we do, because in our heart of hearts, we think when we are dead anyway. So let's plunder while we have a chance. And afterwards, if people will suffer, I don't care. I don't know those people in the future, and I'm not going to be around to experience that. So screw it.
Okay. So, so I agree with you, even if this is a bit of a caricature of the materialistic perspective, I still agree with you. So if we then leave the materialistic perspective and take a perspective where consciousness all of a sudden is an important property of our world. And for the time being, we can just assume that that is the case, that consciousness is an important property of our world. Whether it is the main property, we could come back to a bit later, but let's just assume that consciousness is an important property. With that insight, when you really realize that in some sort of not just philosophical, but embodied way, how does that change your worldview, and how does that change your outlook on life?
Completely, it changes everything. But before I get into that, let me just make a remark about when you said, this is a bit of a caricature of the materialist perspective. Only insofar as people are not really materialists. If they are really materialists, what I said is no caricature. It's a direct, unavoidable, acknowledged implication of the materialist perspective. It's no caricature at all. It's very rigorous, accurate, and precise. Now, you might say, well, most people then don't believe in materialism. Perhaps until they have to confront the issue heads on, face on, like if they get a terminal diagnosis. And then we will see what they really, really believe in their heart of hearts. Will they be serene, or will they fall into despair? Then you know. The perspective I put forward is not that Bernado Kastrup will survive as Bernado Kastrup after he's dead. Obviously, that's not the case. Something major happens with Bernado Kastrup when he stops metabolizing, when his brain stops working. My perspective is different. What I put forward is that every theory of reality has to have what philosophers call an ontological primitive, something in terms of which you explain everything else. But the primitive...
And for those who haven't heard that term before, you can say that two fundamental questions in philosophy is the question about ontology and epistemology. Epistemology is about how can you know things, and ontology is about what does really exist, what is the fundamental nature of reality.
Yeah, so that's a question that nobody evades, even if they think they are not thinking about it. They are always running some kind of operating system in their minds, which is informing them what their best hypothesis is regarding what the world is. It's impossible to be agnostic of ontology. We have had philosophers that called for the end of ontology, of metaphysics. Ontology is a part of metaphysics. Nietzsche called for it. Heidegger called for it. The early Wittgenstein called for it. And theoretically, it's coherent, but in practice, given human psychology, it is impossible. All you will achieve if you don't think about questions of ontology is you will have a default ontology that goes completely unexamined, and it's still guiding your life. You're just not thinking about it, so you may make much more mistakes.
And again, as we said, it's not perhaps that you don't think about it. You might be completely unaware of your ontological assumptions, but still it guides you.
Yes.
And this is not because you have learned something in school. It's just that you absorb this through the culture that has this built-in assumptions about reality.
Exactly. Your feelings will be a response to that inner narrative, which you may not even be explicitly aware that you're telling yourself, but you will emotionally respond to that. It will color, calibrate, modulate your feelings. Now, any ontological theory of reality has to end in an ontological primitive. You cannot keep on explaining one thing in terms of another forever. At some point, you hit rock bottom. You say, okay, this just exists. That's the ontological primitive. And materialism says fields, physical fields are the ontological primitive. Even consciousness, even the qualities of experience can be explained in terms of abstract physical fields. Now, idealism would say, no. What we call matter, which is what appears on the screen of perception, can itself be reduced to a field of subjectivity, not a physical field, not defined in terms of numbers, a list of numbers, but defined in terms of qualities in potentiality. And that field permeates all nature. And that is the ontological primitive. You can explain everything in terms of that. You can't explain that in the same way that under materialism or physicalism, you can't explain the quantum fields, they just exist. Under idealism, you would say, well, this conscious field of subjectivity permeating and underlying all nature simply exists, and everything else are just patterns of excitation of this field. And what are human beings and other living animals, conscious animals? They are dissociative complexes of this field of subjectivity. Dissociation is a process that's more or less well understood in psychiatry. And we are certain that it does happen. Since the advent of neuroimaging in the beginning of the century, we know strong forms of dissociation do happen. So the idea here is that Bernado Kastrup, Tomas, we are just what certain dissociative processes in this field of subjectivity, this universal mind, if you will, what these dissociative processes look like when observed from the outside. That's what living bodies, metabolism, that's what it is. It's the extrinsic appearance of dissociative processes in nature, in this field of subjectivity that underlies all nature. Now, if you understand this to be true, it changes everything, because now your core subjectivity is not going to end. A particular configuration of mind that you call yourself is going to end. Bernado Kastrup is not surviving into the year 2100. But my core subjectivity, that deep feeling of I-ness, before you know that you were born at that date, at that place, and that you studied to be this or that, and you're married to that or that, before all these narratives of personal identity assert themselves and define your identity, there is a sort of I-ness that is behind all that, and which experiences it. Think of it as what you would feel, how you would feel from within if you were suddenly to find yourself in a completely dark, silent room and completely amnesic. You don't remember anything, you can't perceive anything. Would there still be something it is like to be you? Yes, sure, there would be. There would be an I. Would that I be Thomas? Absolutely not, because you don't remember anything, you're not perceiving anything, you don't have a particular vantage point into the world that characterizes you as different from others. You don't have episodic memories to define you in terms of a narrative. So my position is that that raw core subjectivity will always survive.
Would it be too much an oversimplification and explain this with the Buddhist metaphors of the waves on the ocean to make this more?
That's fine. We are like waves.
No, understanding. So we as individuals, we are waves, and in this Buddhist metaphor, you have these two waves that are on the way towards the beach, and one of them gets a bit panicked, saying that we will crash on the beach, we will die, and then the other wave says, well, realize you are not a wave, you are part of the ocean. And once you feel that connection with the ocean, then yes, you as a wave, you will disappear, but you will still have this connection with the depth
don't even
in the
need to
ocean.
Develop the connection. The connection is always there. It was from the beginning. It's what keeps us alive.
Okay.
But
so if we now realize that we are these conscious waves that are interconnected, and some sort of primitive original subjectivity will always be there. Once we realize that, so what effects will that have on both our individual lives, but also perhaps more interesting for me would be the way we look upon society and the way we look upon the planet. So if we take these three levels, what is the shift on the individual level?
First one, meaning returns to our lives, because now an insight that you have today will live forever. It's never going to be lost. So even if you're suffering terribly today, you know that you're contributing some level of understanding and insight to what's going on, to nature at large, which will never disappear. It will never be for nothing. Nothing is ever for nothing. It's an original new experience that is adding something to nature. The need to establish and reinforce our individual identity with respect to the rest of the world suddenly becomes moot. You don't need now to go and say, Thomas is the top guy in the world. He's the most intelligent. No, he's a real tough guy. I mean, why? What is that? You see through that fairy tale, and you don't need then to engage in the kind of destructive behavior that accompanies the need for individual self-affirmation. Fear of death, fear of oblivion. Fear of death you can still have, but fear of oblivion is gone. Where are you going to go? You are what's going on. Where are you going to go? You're not going to go anywhere, regardless of what happens. You're still right here. It's just that this particular dissociative process, this kind of dream you're having, you wake up from it. But when you wake up from a dream, you don't mourn the death of your dream avatar because you realize, oh, it was me all along. I was not the dream avatar. I just thought I was it. But you don't mourn the death of the dream avatar.
But do you think that there is that continuity of consciousness? Because what you said there before perhaps indicated that what is surviving is not a continuous self-awareness, but something more deeper just.
It survives for exactly the same reason that it survives when you wake up. From the point of view of your dream avatar, waking up is death. It's the end of your dream avatar.
Yeah.
It's the end of that individual narrative that the dream avatar thought he or she was. When you wake up, it's toast. It's gone. There's nothing left. Except your memories. But you don't go nuts. You mourning the death of your dream avatar, because it's that transition that allows you to see that your dream avatar, in fact, never existed as an individual agent. It was something your mind was doing along with the rest of the dream. You just thought that you were that one thing your mind was doing, but you never were that.
Again, the wave. The wave. If you identify too much as a wave and don't understand that you are part of the ocean.
But this is only a game while you are a dream avatar. You cannot. It's only worthwhile to have this discussion from the point of view of the dream avatar. From the point of view of you awake, the whole discussion is completely senseless. It's like, come on, I remember now what I really was all along. So the discussion is moot. It's a moot point.
And of course, on an individual basis, this changes your outlook on your life. But then, what would change in your outlook on society?
We don't need the fix anymore, the addictive fix of the next thing to buy. I think the next thing to buy is very important when you don't have enough to survive with a minimum degree of comfort and fulfillment. And that, unfortunately, is the case for most people on this planet. But you achieve that level, financially speaking, quite quickly, quite cheaply. And beyond that, it's just an addictive fix. If you think you need more, no, you already have a yacht and a car and a house, and you need the second house and the third or the second yacht. I mean, that's addiction. It's playing right there. You need the next fix, and needs to be stronger than the previous one. No, you see through the addiction, because if philosophy is embodied, you really realize that the one thing that counts is what's going on within. It's the level of your insight, the level of your understanding of yourself, and your own ability not only to forgive yourself, but to validate yourself. And you don't need that to come from the outside anymore. You don't need crowds of adoring fans if you are a famous person, or you don't need the next million in your account for you to be able to look in the mirror and say you are worthwhile being.
I just heard the other day someone saying that self-worth is the new net worth. So
absolutely,
that's essentially what you're saying, that of waking up to that fact.
But the danger is that we would turn this only into a psychological narrative. No, we should worry about self-worth. Of course, self-worth is the only real worth we can actually ever give ourselves. Even if we project that onto the outside world, ultimately it comes from us. But you have to believe that there is an ontological basis for it, that it's not just a story that you tell yourself, like sort of to feel better. Because people will see that as self-deception.
Well, so if we go a little bit more into that ontological base and become a little bit more philosophical when looking at society. So if consciousness is in everywhere, then you could say that that society also has some sort of consciousness, that there is an inside perspective to society and to culture. And once you realize that there is an inside perspective to our society, what realizations do that bring to you?
Well, just first a clarification. By saying that consciousness, a field of subjectivity, underlies all nature, I'm not saying that this mouse has a conscious inner life of its own, that there is something it's like to be the mouse as opposed to whatever else is happening around it. I'm not saying that. I think only living beings, as the images of dissociated complex C's in this field of subjectivity, only living beings have a private conscious inner life of their own. The mouse doesn't, because there is no mouse. The mouse is an arbitrary partitioning of the inanimate universe that we do for convenience. You know, where does the river end and the ocean begin? There is no river, there is no ocean, there is just the inanimate universe as a whole. I'm
totally with you, but I would argue that society is a middle level between innate material like the mouse or a stone and us humans, because we have this consciousness in a very manifest way and we are self-aware of that. But through symbolic language and our culture, we have the unique ability to put some of that consciousness outside into our culture and into society. And that's a very important part in the way that we are constantly creating and recreating society. So for me, realizing that society in this respect has got sort of traces of our human consciousness and our human actions, our human visions and values and beliefs, that for me becomes a realization that we need to, in a completely different way than before, care about both culture and societal institutions, and understanding that culture and societal institutions are not just neutral objects, but that they actually carry a bit of human subjectivity and affect us in that way. Would you agree with that?
I agree, but I don't think you even need idealism or this consciousness-only ontologies to grant validity to what you just said. I mean, this is empirically a fact. We can observe it. So regardless of metaphysics, we are all running a sort of cultural operating system. Our views are not
a matrix, more or less.
A kind of psychological matrix, yes. Yeah. It informs us in ways that we are not even cognizant of. It guides our decisions, our emotions, our thinking in completely unexamined ways. For instance, it in a very artificial way defines our sense of plausibility. What we think is plausible or implausible is a direct implication of the cultural narrative, that little operating system that runs subconsciously in all of us. It's not an objective sense of plausibility. For instance, in recent years, it has become culturally plausible that you can upload your consciousness into a computer. Now, this is one of the most illogical, absurd conclusions that can be derived from logical reasoning informed by empirical data. It's ridiculous, it's stupid. It's as stupid as to think that if you simulate kidney function on your computer will urinate on your desk. It doesn't matter how accurate the simulation is not the thing simulated. So a simulation of conscious inner life is not conscious inner life. But culturally, it has become plausible that conscious computers, where we are all going to be uploaded, may come at some point. You know, series like Black Mirror plant this kind of nonsense into the culture. And we buy into this because what defines plausibility for us is what echoes back from the culture.
Yeah.
If there is a very strong echo about something, even if it is completely absurd, untenable, stupid even, the sheer force and momentum of that constant echo convinces us that it's plausible.
Yeah.
Or that something that is very self-evident is totally implausible. Like the notion that consciousness is the only thing happening. It's obvious. Everything that has never touched consciousness might as well not exist as far as you're concerned. And everything that isn't consciousness is and has always been an abstraction of consciousness. But we live in a culture in which this has become new age woo-woo, associated with gullibility and unreason. And this is insane. It's remarkable that we are here.
Yeah, but would you say that an idealistic worldview could help us to realize that we are actually living in this sort of matrix and waking up to the effect that this has on us, and also how we consciously or unconsciously are replicating this world, and that we should relate to this world much more cautiously and consciously?
Of course, it's critical to it because look, the difference between the physicalist and the idealist perspective is that in the former case, you don't need to take introspection very seriously, because whatever you understand or realize by introspection is a kind of illusion. It's a side effect of objective brain function. But in the latter, under idealism, introspection gives you a window into the only universe that counts, and that's the universe of mind, the universe of what's going on in your inner consciousness. And so it validates introspection, and it's only through introspectively examining our assumptions, our premises, our beliefs. It's only by doing that that we will then actually begin changing society in a sustainable way. And this is a very important difference, because the change cannot come from the outside, otherwise preaching would work. But after 2,000 years of Christian culture in Europe, we know that preaching doesn't work. Yeah. You can preach yourself blue in the face, and somehow it doesn't change anything. Even if people believe you're preaching, it doesn't change anything, because their actions are being calibrated from something within, not from what they are sort of absorbing at a superficial layer of mind from the outside.
But then this perspective from within, if we can't affect the evolution of that perspective, the maturation of that inner perspective from outside preaching, I still think that it's possible for us all to connect to this source in more deeper ways throughout life, or even evolve this inner perspective throughout life. So how could we go about doing that? How can we become better at this?
Look, I wouldn't be doing everything I have been doing for the past 15 years if I didn't believe that that were possible. I think what we need is to give people the ability to intellectually give themselves permission to take introspection and mind seriously. Because what happens right now is that the whole culture is echoing to them that this stuff is spiritual nonsense. It's flaky stuff. You know, it's not hardcore stuff. It's not really real. It's not really concrete. So even if you have an introspective insight, you dismiss it, because that's what the culture is echoing back to you. You don't give yourself intellectual permission to take your intuitions seriously, to take your embodied insight seriously, to take seriously that which sort of comes to us by percolating through the roots of our being, as opposed to created here in the head through thinking. So the way to change that is to create a cultural environment in which this introspective approach, taking mind seriously, is considered a valid thing to do. That people like you and me, people, I mean, you've had success in your life. I hold 2 PhDs. If people like us are saying, this is meaningful, this is not nonsense, This isn't flaky. It's been informing my life. Yeah. I give myself intellectual permission to do this after decades of studying this in very much depth. Now they can become open to themselves. So what comes through is not the preaching, because if we were just preaching, we would be as successful as everybody else has been in the last 2,000 years.
Yes, yes.
What you achieve with that is you open a door within. People open that door themselves. It's just that the culture is not forcing them to keep that door closed anymore. And then they will change themselves. All they need is to give themselves permission. And that permission can be achieved by listening to the outside if people like you and me sort of raise our voices a little more and make our argument very clearly.
And to deepen that connection, two suggestions, one not so controversial and one controversial. My non-controversial suggestion to deepen that connection is to spend more time in nature and connecting with nature. Would you agree that that could facilitate and deepen that? Yeah. And a bit more controversial, there is a lot of talk nowadays about psychedelics and how psychedelics can open these inner doors. What is your take on the psychedelic renaissance?
Okay, I have used psychedelics many times, including high doses. I haven't used it for several years now, but I've engaged in my own study plan of the psychedelic experience very carefully, very judiciously for 2 or 3 years. I am very cautious about it. I'll first say what my position is, and then I will add some disclaimers. I think psychedelics are a valid and valuable tool. They certainly helped open certain doors in my mind that were closed before. They certainly gave me much deeper insight into what mind is, how it works, the mechanics of mind. So in that sense, I think they're very valuable. I think they should not be used by people below under 30, not because it should be illegal. I don't think it should be illegal, but I think that their value only really manifests when you've gone through the middle of life, when you're no longer trying to assert yourself as an individual in the world and carve a space for yourself, when you're worried with the deeper questions now. You're no longer in that outward fight of life, you know, to get a job, get a partner, and buy a house and all that stuff. Now, having said all this, I think psychedelic gnosis is a very tricky business. If you think that what psychedelics will do for you is to show you that aliens in the Pleiades are sending us heart vibrations at superluminal speed, that's when you have to start questioning it. What psychedelics show is that mind has as a prime directive to deceive itself. And it is very, very, very good at deceiving itself. And it is deceiving itself right now.
Yeah, and you have to add that for people to understand that deception is not a bug, it's a feature. It had survival value in our environment of evolutionary adaptation.
Even before that, foundational mind already has that as its natural disposition. Mind wants to deceive itself because that's the only way to create a reality. If you see through all the layers of deception, then poof, it's all gone. And that isn't fun. So I think that's the prime directive of mind. So the value of the psychedelic experience is not that you will come back with the certainty that you physically went into another dimension and had telepathic contact with insect-like beings from another galaxy. You should be very wary of coming back with that conclusion. What it shows you is that you can be as certain of that conclusion as you were certain of your conclusions right now. And that's the sobering part. It's not that the trance is real. No, it's just mind. The sobering part is this too is just mind. It's happening right now. This too is a trance, because mind has the ability to develop a profoundly deep, a very compelling sense of reality of external reality, even when there is no such external reality going on. Mind projects a reality for itself. And it certainly does that in a psychedelic trance. And you know it because you never left your bed. If somebody was sitting next to you while you were visiting aliens in the Pleiades, that person will be able to tell you afterwards, you've been here all along. So that was just mind projecting an external reality and believing it with every fiber of its being. Indeed. So what conclusion do you take from that? It's that this too, that's mind as well. You are on drugs right now. You know, your brain only works on drugs. They're called neurotransmitters. Psychedelics are only chemically, they are neurotransmitters with slight modifications. Slight modifications. So you change the neurotransmitter, which themselves are just the extrinsic appearance of a mental process. You change them and your reality changes, and you will be as convinced of that reality as you are of this right now. You're on drugs right now. This is mind making stuff up too, right here. That's the value of psychedelics.
So having experienced that gives you a deeper understanding how our experience is generated by our consciousness.
That's one. It does more. It opens you up to empathy and to understanding in ways that you would never have guessed before. You are much more able, at least that was the case for me after a couple of years of regularly doing psychedelics. You're much more able, I would say even vulnerable to feeling other people's feelings. You become more connected in that way, to feeling other people's suffering, which is not nice. To understanding people who commit acts of what you would have called evil before. You realize that there is a place in mind where you too would do the same if you were in that same place in the mind. So the idea that you are fundamentally different from the other people and the other things you don't like, that fundamental division that we like to live in, it's gone. It's gone. And you can empathize with nearly everyone and everything. I still have a couple of things that I just cannot empathize. I cannot relate to. I've tried, but I can't. It's not because I have a prejudice against it. It's not because I don't want to understand. I do, but it's too deep and I haven't touched it yet. But most other things, I have traveled through places in mind where I go like, oh, I see. I understand. It doesn't mean that I agree or that I would do the same. No, I understand it. And nobody should be ashamed of understanding. And that's the thing about our adolescent culture. We are taught to be ashamed of understanding evil. So in other words, we need to behave like children all the way through life. It's absurd. Nobody should be ashamed of understanding anything, the least of which is evil. If you don't want evil to govern, prerequisite number one, understand evil. It's something to be proud of. And psychedelics teach you that.
So we touched on using nature as a way of deepening your connection to these perspectives. We mentioned psychedelics. Would you recommend any other path for opening up to these perspectives and deepening the relationship to consciousness?
I'll say something that will not be popular. It will probably, some people will say, shut up now. Suffering is the golden path to understanding what's going on. Nothing like suffering makes you stop on your tracks and question your own assumptions, your own starting points, your beliefs. Nothing like suffering stops you from rushing to judgment. And life has a way of bringing suffering to you right when you need it, right when your behavior is becoming damaging and unsustainable. Suffering comes and sort of stops you on your tracks and forces you to look within, forces you to reflect, forces you to review how you're going about yourself, about others, about the world, about life. That's the golden path And Buddhism teaches that life is suffering. That's a noble truth, number one. And there is meaning to that. And now we can go to Viktor Frankl. Find meaning in suffering like he did in a Nazi concentration camp. And the golden avenue will be open to you. Now, it's an avenue that nobody likes. If I have the chance, I don't walk that avenue. Give me a chance and I am far away from it. But if you find yourself there, at least know that there is meaning. You couldn't run away. Okay, you are there. But at least you know, I am in the golden avenue now. This will force me to grow.
And staying there on the Buddhist path, what would you say about meditation? Is meditation also a way?
I think what we in the West call meditation is such a diluted version of what in the East it was originally meant to do, that if I use the word without any caveat, without any disclaimer about what I mean of it, and just expect that people will understand what I mean, I would say it changes very little. It will make you calmer. Mindfulness, meditation may help you become more self-aware, but it's not going to change your values. It's not going to change your destructive behavior towards yourself and towards others and towards the world. Look, our problem is a civilization-wide addiction. You don't solve an addiction by taking an aspirin, if you know what I mean. And meditation, as the West understands, is an aspirin. It will soothe your headache a little bit, but it will not stop you from being addicted and engaging in the kind of self-destructive and universally destructive behavior that addiction leads to. So I don't think meditation is at the level of suffering or contact with nature. Psychedelics I would put one level below the other two.
Good.
They can be very helpful for some people. They can be very confusing for others. But it's definitely not an aspirin. That's more like chemotherapy.
Yes. So we are coming a bit to the end of our hour together. I would like to finish by asking you, to our listeners today that are curious on exploring both your thoughts, but also the perspectives and learning more about the importance of consciousness, and perhaps not just from a cognitive level, but also through various psychotechnologies, to use John Vervaeke's language that we have touched upon. Where would you guide them as a starting point that is not too cognitive and not too philosophical?
There are lots of things out there. It's not like the truth is a secret. People have articulated it for 3,500 years. It's all out there if you have the eyes to see. Of course, I'll emphasize what I have been trying to do. I'm the director of Essentia Foundation, and what we try to do is exactly what you just mentioned, raise that kind of awareness through a scholarly way, based on empirical evidence and analytic reasoning, not spiritual insight. Not because we don't like spiritual insight. No, on the contrary, we like and we think it's a great thing. But there are lots of people out there who are trying to get this message through to people through meditation, spiritual insight, spiritual techniques. There is no gap there. The menu is full of options. Where we, until very recently, didn't have much of an option is when you want to talk about the possibility that consciousness is the ontological primitive, is the ground of nature, from a purely scientific, logical, analytical perspective, from a scholarly and rigorous perspective. That's what was missing. So that's what Essentia Foundation tries to do. So if you're interested in that perspective, you can go to essentiafoundation.org.
Thank you. Thank you for a very rich and, for me, enlightening conversation. Thank you, Bernado.
My pleasure, Thomas.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.